Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us to the last day of our training. Today, our topic is focused on the monitoring of anti-corruption policy implementation and our MACP tool. As you know, we will implement MACP this year in practice in one public institution in each of the 9 target countries. I hope that you listen carefully to the presentations and please be active. Ask questions if you don't understand anything. You can also post any questions in the chat and Q&A, but similar to the previous 2 days, we'll prefer for you to ask the question personally so that all the participants can hear the reply. Just a short introduction of MACP. It's a tool that measures the internal anti-corruption policy and measures in a single public institution, and more specifically their effectiveness, their implementability, and also if they cover all the important activities typical for this institution. In that manner, the management of the institution can see if there are any gaps in their anti-corruption policies and improve them in the future by creating new ones. Without any further ado, I give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Todor Galev, to present you more with the theoretical background of this tool. So, Todor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dani. Sorry. I'll present the theoretical, actually a very small part of the theoretical framework behind this MACP tool, and we will focus mostly on the first 2 practical steps in the implementation of the tool, while after that, in the next presentations, Alexander will continue with presenting the next practical steps. Let me say that this is quite difficult tool to be implemented, and I guess even if you don't have questions right now, they will arise during the practical implementation in your countries, and this is, I should say, this is normal. And I would like to encourage you, when you have such questions, to be to ask us, and we even discuss among ourselves that we will try to offer some kind of possibility for discussion among all the partners in the project, something like, for example, a common mailing list where questions could be sent and answered either by us or by other partners, so to have to benefit from let's say mutual learning, because as I said, I guess there will be some practical challenges that you have to overcome in implementing this tool. Just a moment to share the screen. It is this one. Sorry. Yes. Okay. As Dani already said, if you have questions, you can interrupt me during the presentation, and this is not a problem, and I'll try to answer them immediately. First of all, as Dani already presented it, MACP, or Monitoring Anti-Corruption Policy Implementation, is tool that was designed to identify vulnerabilities and potential gaps between corruption risk practices in individual public institutions and the availability of anti-corruption policies and practical measures addressing this risk. The institutions usually are uh, uh, selected as a result of the state capture assessment diagnostic on economic sector level. It could not be a specific or particular institution that is identified during SCAT-ESL implementation, but institution of the same type or similar institution. Like, for example, you can identify that risky are, for example, institutions regulating the construction process and controlling the construction process. There could be different institutions involved, but you can identify, for example, that one regional or national institution is much vulnerable, is more vulnerable than others. But of course, to implement MACP, you need to convince the institution to take part into it. So if there is no chance to get an approval from the institution management, then you can select another similar institution to this one, if there is such, or just go to another institution which is even more less risky, let's say, according to the SCAT-ESL estimate assessments. Here I put two publications. One of them back in 2015, actually when for the first time MACP was piloted in 4 countries in Europe. So this is until now, I would say, the most detailed description of the whole methodology behind MACP and of the results from the first pilot implementation. During the years, we changed slightly some small issues in the methodology, but in general, it remains the same. So I strongly recommend you to look in this publication if you want to if you have questions regarding methodology and practical steps. While the second one on the right side is the most current result of the implementation of MACP in 9 public institutions across Europe that we just finished and actually published a month ago. It doesn't have detailed methodological part, but you can see, you can check it as an example of how the final comparative report that or final public report that will be published looks like. As you'll see in my presentation, and Sasha will also mention it, actually the results of MACP are 2 types of report. One is this public one. In this case, it's a kind of a not real comparison, but comparative as much as possible, I would say, between the 9 institutions. If it is a report only for one institution, then it's okay. And a technical report, or what we called technical report, which is not public, not intended to be public, which is which addressed addresses only the management of the institution, and which consists or includes all the results. These are quite long reports with many tables inside. Sash will show you probably a template for this report, or at least when it comes to producing this, you will have this template. So these two publications are important because they give different views to MACP. The first one is for the methodology more. The second one to see how the results look like. And how we analyzed the collected data and information. So about the MACP approach, MACP assess and monitors actually anti-corruption policies and experience and estimated corruption pressure through quantitative surveys among employees of the selected organization, external experts and clients, who are the people that are most familiar with the actual policies and their potential shortcomings. It monitors both the actual experience and estimates of corruption pressure through a kind of victimization service among both officials or employees of the organizations and clients of the respective organization. The whole toolbox, I would say, of MACP contains of three different surveys that are named after the groups that they target. MACP officials, so these are the employees of the organization. MACP experts, these are external experts that are familiar with the organization, its activities, anti-corruption policies, and so on. And MACP clients, these are clients of the organization in terms of citizens or businesses. Of course, the best ways to have all the tools together, and they produce results that are that complement each other and give additional perspectives and additional benefits in comparing the results between these three groups. However, the main part of MACP is the MACP officials, and we'll focus only on this. As I know, at least in this year, first year of the our project, we will implement only MACP officials. So I mentioned MACP experts and clients just to have an idea what they are and where they stay in the process, but for now we will not focus on them. MACP was MACP tool was designed as mainly a self-diagnostic tool. So a tool that the organization could implement by itself after the initial benchmarking scan together with a researchers team, so with us, let's say. And it is designed as a tool which produce results and information specifically for the management of the institution, how to improve the anti-corruption setup of their own institutions. As I mentioned already, it consists of the initial benchmarking scan, which define the baseline, let's say, of the anti-corruption setup in the institution. And after that, it is intended to be self-implemented by or implemented by the organization itself on a regular period. What we have discussed with our colleagues during the years is that annual implementation is too much, because the anti-corruption setups or the anti-corruption policies and internal organizational culture do not change so fast. So probably 2-year period for monitoring for implementing the MACPI again and again is better. Of course, most of the organizations, when we talk with them, we talk only for the MACPI benchmarking scan, so the initial implementation of MACPI, and if the organization wants, and if the organization like the results, then they can ask for using this tool in next rounds, let's say. But in this case, the instruments, the survey questionnaires, the list of policies, and so on, that we will produce during the initial benchmarking scan will be enough, we believe, that the organization could make by themselves the next rounds. Of course, I'm a little bit skeptic that the organization can do the statistical analysis, but this is another topic. So in this project, we'll do only MACPI officials, and we'll do only the initial benchmarking scan. The components and methods that are used in the MACPI tool are several. And here you can see a kind of a table or matrix that shows which methods for which component is used. So first we have to identify the corruption interest, which is based on the assessment of the few representatives from the organization. I'll come to this later with more details, which is done through the MACPI in-depth interviews with these representatives. Then it come to MACPI, then you can implement MACPI officials survey, which measures corruption pressure, but also applicability of anti-corruption policies, implementation of anti-corruption policies, and estimated effectiveness of these policies. While the other methods and tools like MACPI experts, MACPI clients are designed to measure some additional features also. At the end, or simultaneously with conducting MACPI officials, experts, and clients, you can do also some additional desk research that is based on available, I would say, background data for the selected institution that will give you an additional depth of the analysis when you start to analyze the results from MACPI officials. As I said, the MACPI officials has several steps, actually 6 steps for doing 6 practical steps. My presentation will be focused only on the first 2 steps, on preparation and in-depth interview, while Alexander will continue with the next steps after that. What actually means and include this MACPI toolbox or different tools that we have? MACPI officials is anonymous, and this is very important when you contact the institution to underline this. So it is designed in a way, first of all, the survey doesn't collect any information that could identify the respondents. neither by us nor by the institution. So even we don't know who is filling in the questionnaire, because the questionnaire has a single universal URL or web link that is received by all the employees. So there is no way technically to understand who actually fills the questionnaire, who not, and whose are the answers. So it is totally anonymous. We aim to be representative, so to answer to some sampling requirements, online survey among the employees of the selected organization. When there is a big or large scale organization, large size organization, usually we aim at 400 for more than 400 employees to fill in the questionnaire, which is not so difficult actually. For example, in the last MACPI that we did here in Bulgaria in National Revenue Agency, that has about 1,500 employees included in the MACPI survey. With only one announcement of the survey, we collected, if I'm not wrong, something like 700-800. I forgot the exact figure, but enough responses, much more than the target. When we are doing MACPI officials in a small scale organization, let's say organization with 30 or 50 or something like 100 employees, then it is recommended to have exhaustive sampling. So to send the questionnaire to all the employees, all the relevant employees, as I said in a while, when we discuss this with the institution representatives, some employees could be excluded from the MACPI survey because they are not relevant to the aim of this survey. So, for example, some administrative positions and so on. Even in a small scale organization, if you have less than I would say 25, 30 responses, or at least 50% of the total number of employees, the results will be not very reliable. Then using some predefined computational models, we compute we compute for each activity and each corruption anti-corruption policy corruption pressure, implementability, level of implementation, effectiveness, and so on. This is something that Sasha will describe and explain you with a lot of details after that. And the importance of having different groups into the survey is to be able to compare their results among them to expose potential bias. So you can compare, for example, if you have enough responses, of course, enough number of responses. You can compare, for example, the responses of mid and top level management with employees or if you do MACP experts and MACP clients, you can compare the responses from employees with experts or with clients. As I said, and just to mention here, MACP experts also use an online survey, which use the same, almost the same questionnaire with a few specific questions. Here we recommend a sample of 20-30 experts per institution. It means that we need to find, if you have to do it, of course, you need to find about 20-30 experts that are familiar with the activities and anti-corruption policies of the institution. This could be, for example, anti-corruption researchers from civil society, from academia. This could be some specialized investigative journalists that are dealing with this. This could be officials from another institution that is working with the SCANET institution, or former officials from the SCANET institution, or, for example, representatives of business associations that are dealing with the institution and has information not only from their, let's say, own experience, but also from their members dealing with this institution, and so on. MACP clients is I would say completely different victimization survey among the clients of the institution. So this could be individual persons or citizens and businesses, or other type of organizations in some cases. The recommended sample here is about 400 persons or 400 responses. It could be done either online or face-to-face in some cases, or even in I'll say in very, very exceptional case, we can think also about telephone interview. Even this is not suitable for this complex type of questionnaire that they have to fill in. And MACP clients give a kind of experience-based assessment regarding incident rates of corruption pressure, actual corruption practices that have been experienced by the clients, mechanisms of the corruption transactions, assessments of corruption risk, and so on. So when, as I already mentioned, we start with what we call MACP benchmarking scan, and then we do the anti-corruption policy analysis. After we have the results of the benchmarking scan, we provide this analysis to the institution management. In the ideal case, they will design or new policies, or modify the existing ones according to the results. Then they by themselves, or the institution by themselves, or external experts like us are doing the diagnostic scan to see whether the improvements in the anti-corruption setup has actually changed the results in positive way. And again, you can go again and again in the same to new rounds in the same circle. What are the first two steps that I want to focus now? The first step is preparation. It includes, it usually starts with an initial getting familiar with organizations. So through desk research, look for the structure of the organization, its functions, its activities, what kind of anti-corruption policies they have, and so on. Then comes to the preparatory, or we could say also inception meeting with designated representatives from the organization, which is used to introduce practical steps that have to be implemented by the organization together with the researchers, with us, to discuss structure of the organization and sampling, and to prepare on the first step, at the end of the first step, a list of activities of the organization. I'll come to this back later in the next slides. The important thing here is actually when you select the organization, how you can convince them to implement MACPI. Our experience shows that it's really difficult. There are some cases or some situations that could help you in convincing the organizations. First of all, and it is very important, is to select organization that you probably know in advance, and which is more important, they know you as a institution in advance. So if there is a mutual trust between the SCANET organization and the research team, it goes much smoothly. Another thing that could help for this to convince the organization to implement MACPI is if you identify a need which is prescribed by the regulation for some kind of anti-corruption policy evaluation. So in the project that we just finished, in 2 of the countries, there were organizations that said, okay, according to our internal regulations and according to, in another case, according to the national regulation, we have to do a regular assessment of our anti-corruption policies. So we convinced them that they can use MACPI as such an assessment instead of just reporting some other, instead of trying to develop an assessment tool for themselves, let's say, and to assess the policies by themselves with some kind of methodology. So try to identify whether some of the organizations that are identified as risky have the need or is prescribed in the regulations that they need to have regular evaluation of the anti-corruption policies. This could help you convince the organization. Another possibility is to speak with superiority management, I would say, or government of the organization. For example, in our case in Bulgaria, in the last in this last project that I mentioned already, we talk with the Vice Prime Minister who is responsible specifically for anti-corruption in the whole government. So we said, see, here is a methodology that is approved by the European Commission. It is already implemented in other countries. It is tested. It is piloted. It could produce helpful results that you can use in your work. We identify 6 possible organizations. Please support us in getting in contacting this organization and convincing them, 2 of them, to implement MACPI. And the Vice Prime Minister was really happy to help us, because actually this is a way to show additional stream of work, which is part of her responsibility in this case, and to report that she did something exceptional, let's say. And of course, when the Vice Prime Minister sent a letter to the organizations, they say, okay, we agree. So sometimes it helps to talk to the superiors and not directly to the organizations management. In the second step of the in-depth interviews, we preparing the matrix of potential risk zones, or this is how the activities are linked with the different forms of potential corruption in these activities. Then through in-depth interviews, we define corruption interest or potential corruption interest that exists for each cell of this matrix. So for already identified risk zones, that we prepare a list of anti-corruption policies and measures, and through in-depth interview also identify this whether there are anti-corruption policies or measures associated with each risk zone or with each activity. I'll come to this with more results in next slides. So the first step, preparing a list of activities. I give you here an example from the National Revenue Agency Bulgaria list of activities. How actually prepare this list? Using desk research, reading documents of the organization, we try to summarize a list of activities. And actually, when we started with the initial meeting with the representatives of the organization, we discussed two things. We discussed first the structure of the organization. What are the departments, the directorates, and so on in the organization, which of them will be included and which excluded in the MACP, but also we looked at the specific activities that each department is doing. And we built a list of activities which was quite different than this one, which is the final one, which was longer, and we start to discuss with the representatives of the organization which activities they think should be presented in the final version of this list. So you need to do a kind of classification or typology of similar activities to group them into a single one, and also to decide if there are some activities that you can skip. For example, let's say physical guards of the buildings probably don't have corruption interests. So this activity, even if you met it in the documents, you can skip it. When you look at the organization, you can see that some activities are divided between different departments. So, for example, what we call here human resources, or this is all the activities related to the selection and management of human resources in the organization. They could be divided in different departments in the central unit of the organization, in the regional units, if it's a national organization and has regional or local units, and so on and so on. But at the end, we classify or make a typology of similar activities and group them into one. The aim is to have not more than 10 activities, because after that, these activities will be part of the survey. So each employee should answer whether it is part of one of these activities, and whether he or she is familiar with these activities, and to assess this activity in terms of corruption risks. And imagine that there could be employees that will answer for 1, 2, 3 of these activities, but also there could be employees that will answer for all of the activities. So if the activities are more than 10, the questionnaire become very, very long and very difficult to be implemented. When you have finalized the list of activities, then you prepare the so-called matrix of potential risk zones. So this matrix means that you have in the column all the activities that you already identified, and in the rows, sorry, and in the columns you have the different types of possible corruption risk. And you try together with the representatives of the organization, you try to define whether there is a corruption interest for each cell. Here, P means that this interest is presented. So to facilitate this discussion with the representatives, you also provide them with a definition of each type of corruption, and you also use certain questions or hints like and try to explain the process of the representatives of the organization. So the idea is that you ask the representatives of the organization, for example, if activity 1 is human resources, do you think that in human resources departments in your organization, there is abuse of power or abuse of property? Probably there is abuse of power, but I can't say that in human resources there is abuse of property. Let's try to leave the representatives of the organization to decide whether whether this form of corruption is presented in the relevant activity or not. Of course, in some cases, you can help them with the supporting questions with hints and so on, giving some examples if they don't understand, and so on and so on. But the idea is that at the end of this first, I would say, serious in-depth interview with the representatives of the organization, you need to have this matrix filled in. And to identify potential risks. Potential because you don't ask them about whether this risk exists in their organization. You ask them if they think in general, if this activity is vulnerable, for example, to abuse of power or abuse of property. And this is very important differentiation. And because I already several times said representatives of the organization, and I just remember that I didn't say, usually you work with 2, 3 representatives of the organization that are designated by the management to be contact persons. And these persons should be, or it's better to be part of the executive level. Or I would say part of the expert level, or mid-level management. So this should be people, employees of the organization that have good overview over the whole organization, and in some cases this could be also people that have in their responsibilities to develop and monitor and evaluate anti-corruption setup of the organization. I will not stop on this here because you will have this as part of the templates that you provide, so you can consult this and so on. So after finishing the matrix with the possible risk zones, we need to prepare a list of anti-corruption policies and measures. I give you on the left side here the final list from the National Revenue Agency, and even in Bulgarian on the right side you can see the initial list that we prepared first based on our desk research, and then it was supplemented by some additional activities suggested by the representatives of this organization. And as you can see, just comparing the numbers, the initial list started with 14 policies, and after grouping the similar one and skipping some that we decided are not applicable, we came to a final list with 8 policies. So one in the preparation of the list of anti-corruption policy follows the same logic like the preparing the list of activities. So you start with desk research, you suggest a list of policies based on this desk research to the representatives of the organization, you discuss with them. Usually once is enough, but if necessary, you can do you can make 2 meetings with them. Ask them whether there are some policies that are not presented in the public information. This is an important thing because sometimes there are policies measures that you can't find in the public documents of the organization, and so on. On this stage, one important source of information could be former estimations or reports for anti-corruption measures that some institutions have. So if you look at them, you can find and identify actually what type of anti-corruption policies the institutions have. And then the second important thing is to produce a list that is enough clear and understandable for the employees of the organization, because this list will be also included in the questionnaire, and all the employees should recognize easily what is hidden behind each of these 8 titles of the anti-corruption policies. And this is quite difficult task, I would say, because as you can imagine, especially in large organizations, there are a lot of departments. In many cases, the one department doesn't know in details what are doing the people in the next department, or especially if there is there are regional structures or local structures of the organization, there could be some departments in these structures that are not familiar with the activities, with the policies, and so on and so on. So you need to ensure, and this could be done only with discussing with the representatives of the organization, that this list is understandable for them and it is understandable for other employees. Let's assume that we finalize this list of anti-corruption policies. Then we need to identify whether each of these policies is associated with one or more of the activities that we already have. So we create and prepare a type of table where you have the activities already identified in the rows, and in the columns you have the anti-corruption policies. Usually there are two types of anti-corruption policies: general policies that address more than one activity, like for example assets declaration, or specific anti-corruption policies that address either a single activity or very few number of activities, a very few number of similar activities. So the creation of this, the preparation of this matrix is to see whether you miss something, and to be sure that to see the coverage actually of the activities by different policies. And this is one of the requirement to construct after that the questionnaire. Again, this is done in, as we tell them, in-depth interviews with the representatives of the organization, but actually these are meetings. In the current pandemic situation, these were online meetings, but I would suggest that if it's possible, do it offline, so in person, because then it's much easier, I would say. And I'll finish with this, and just a look ahead for what we need this. And Sashu, I'm afraid will give you a lot of information about this in a while. But here is just an example from the report that we prepared. And what you see here is actually the policies in the rows and the activities in the columns. So the measurement of actual corruption pressure, and actually here you see the effectiveness, the average effectiveness. Oops, sorry. The coverage, yes, the coverage of the of these of the activities by policies. So the analysis here could be something like, see, human resources has actual corruption pressures 23%, which is the highest percentage, and at the same time it is covered by many of the anti-corruption policies, but the assessment for the coverage for some of them is very low. 6%, 8% of the people think that this policy actually cover human resources activity. So it means that it is not well covered. While there are some other activities, like for example, the fifth one, control activities in the territorial directorates, which is covered with much more policies, and the coverage is much better. So this is the kind of analysis that we try to produce at the end, and to provide to the management of the institution. So I finish with this. Thank you, and if you have any question, I will try to answer them. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Todor.
Can I
Yes,
ask
of course.
something?
Go ahead.
Yes, of course.
Sure. If you can come back on the last table you presented, I found it quite interesting. So you try to measure finally the quality of, for example, anti-corruption training of employees, or the code of ethics for line 10. And so from what I understand here, you asked experts what is their opinion on, for example, how the anti-corruption training of employees is related to public procurement or human resources. Is that right?
Yes, but the term related is not, I would say, the right one. So this is exactly, especially this table shows um, the percentage are the percent of employees that think that one specific policy is covering or help to help to diminish the risk of corruption in a specific activity. So this is just one of the results that shows the coverage, what we call the coverage of activities by different policies. And it's not about the actual or estimate corruption pressure and so on. So in general, you are right.
Sorry to butt in. I will show you the exact question after the break. It's
Yes.
Whether we ask the employees if the policy is relevant for each of the activities, and they can check all the activities this policy is relevant to. So this percentage represents how many of the employees think that this policy is relevant to this activity.
Actually, yes. I don't want to stop on this table. I show you just as an example and I know that Sasha will explain not only this but also the other indicators that are computed, so the other tables with results. So each of them describe a specific indicator like the coverage here. And each of them have different aim, let's say, to give different information to us and to the management, of course. To understand the links between these indicators is also not easy task, I would say, but and how these indicators are computed, including, but the idea here was to show you that it has some MACPI was designed to have a practical to produce, let's say, practical advices for the management of the institution or practical recommendations. So when they see, for example, this table and a lot of other tables, they can say, oh, look, we do have here one activity which was assessed as high risky by our own employees, but our own employees actually think that is not enough covered by anti-corruption policies. So we should either develop a new anti-corruption policy which is relevant, specific for this particular activity, or change the existing policies in a way to cover better this activity. So this is,
yes, I
yeah.
understand completely. It's just that I'm working right now on code of ethics and also training, anti-corruption training for employees, and most code of ethics do not refer directly to public procurement, and so I was a bit surprised by the percentage you
Yes,
got there.
and this is
and the same for trainings.
They're giving politically correct responses. They want to select the correct option. This is why we also recommend having experts to, of course, some policies like code of ethics trainings, they're basically useless in most cases because they're very general and do not address any particular corruption threats. But when you give this survey to the employees, especially employees in organizations which are more or less vulnerable to corruption, they are afraid that they will show their organization has problems, and they're trying to give the politically correct answer, or the correct answer as they call it. So we have made this survey in such a way that there are no correct answers, and if they are not being honest, it shows that it is the worst possible outcome.
But
Thank you.
yes, but I would like to add also that in particularly for your example, actually code of ethics could have quite a strong effect on even on procurement, because code of ethics actually give you the moral standards or standards for integrity of the public officials. Of course, the biggest problem here is how to ensure the implementation of these standards. So how to ensure that employees do not violate these standards that are in the code of ethics. But in general, code of ethics is a very could be very strong instrument, not in our countries, in some other cases. For example, I can give you an example. It was in Finland, if I'm not wrong, some years ago, when in one public organization, the head of one of the department was actually sanctioned because of violation of the code of ethics, and this exists actually in even in our legislation. This exists as possibility, but it's another story that, as Sasha said already, in most of the cases, the code of ethics is just something that is, I would say, on paper and on the website of the institution, and there is no practical procedure how to impose the implementation of these standards and how to sanction if there is a violation of these standards.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, then we can finish and continue with, I think, the coffee break, right?
Exactly. So if there are no other questions, please let's go have a coffee. So Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela. And thank you all for attending this training. Let me share my screen. Oh, I hope you can all see my screen. I will be showing not only a presentation, but different files, PDFs, web and Excel and Word. So I will share my whole screen, and I will switch between different files. Please stop me at any moment if something is not clear, or I did it too fast, or you have any questions. So this session will focus on the survey implementation and on the computation of indicators. So these are technical aspects of MACP implementation, while the next training, which will be in 2 hours from now after a one break, the next training will focus on the analytical part, what the indicators mean. So I will partly answer some questions you might be having, like the one before the break, by simply showing you how we compute these indicators and what are the source questions we use. However, I will focus more on what these numbers actually mean and what our experience with this number is after the lunch break. So let me now start with the survey implementation briefly, and then I will focus more on the actual computation of indicators, since we've received a few questions about this, and I hope this training session will be helpful to those of you who have to compute the indicators from MACPI data. This is the primary instrument which can guide you through MACPI implementation. And the state capture assessment on sectoral level methodological toolkit. It includes a section on MACPI, which is quite detailed, and it has all the information needed for you to compute these indicators, and a little bit on how to interpret them. I will show you in more detail another publication, more recent, where we have actually published an analytical report. Actually, Todor showed it before the break, but I will open the actual book and show you what it contains. It might be more helpful for the analytical part, but for the technical part, the survey implementation and the computation of indicators, this is the correct book to use. And this is our first book on MACPI from 2015. When we developed this methodology, the reason we created this was there was lack for standardized procedures for assessing anti-corruption policies, not measuring corruption mind, but assessing anti-corruption policies, whether they are effective, whether they work, and so on. We actually had to define what does assessing a policy mean, and we have a great theoretical background and model in this publication, which you might want to check if you're interested more in the theory behind MACPI. And of course, scholars never agree on one method, that one method is the best, but this approach received very high praise from the European Commission, as well from different organizations we have implemented it in, and we think that it is useful and helpful. So without further ado, let me start with just briefly summarizing the previous steps and showing you what indicators we actually have, what we will be computing today. These are the different groups of indicators, and as you can see, some are shared across several instruments. Like, for example, most of the indicators are available both in through MACPI officials and through MACPI experts. And the reason for that is that, as I mentioned before the break, sometimes officials tend to not be 100% honest. You might find this revelation striking, but this is what we discovered the first weeks we started working on MACPI, and as an anecdotal story to understand the logic behind MACPI better, I will tell you our first attempts to create an instrument by going into the Bulgarian border police, and we initially started much more qualitatively to approach the problem. We had the two in-depth interviews with two experts from the organization, And my colleague wanted to have some quantitative aspect in this interview. So we asked them to rate the risk of corruption for different activities and to rate the different risks of corruption on a scale from 1 to 10. From 1 to, I think it was from 1 to 100 actually. And there were two experts. One of them was very, very close. He was very, he was thinking over every word he was using, and his scores were something between 4 and 5 on a scale from 0 to 100. The other one was much more open, and he gave scores like 60 or 70 on a scale from 0 to 100. And then we had these numbers, and we didn't know how to present them. Do we give both set of assessment scores, or do we average them? And both ways were not very good, because if you average them, then you come up with a medium, with an average score, which actually didn't represent neither of their scores. One was saying 5 from 100, the other one was saying 75 from 100, and the average is 40. So basically one was saying there is no risk whatsoever, or very minimal risk. The other was saying that there is quite tangible risk for this activity, and the average score didn't represent any of these views. So this is why we moved to a quantitative survey among all the employees of the organization, in order to have a larger sample than 2 experts, because obviously experts are very subjective, and it depends very much on whether they know us, on whether they trust us, on what their relations, let's say, with the interviewer in the in-depth interviews are. We have a colleague in our organization who is doing a lot of in-depth interviews, and many people from organizations like Border Police know him, and they trust him, so they are much more willing to share information and their real opinion with him, while they didn't know us, they didn't trust us. And one of them who worked before with our organization was relatively more open. The other one was very guarded and careful. So this is the reason we are doing this. It is not that we don't trust people, but we try to accommodate for individual biases and to see where there are discrepancies in the answers. And this is why we have both MACPI officials and MACPI experts. If we find that some answers from MACPI officials are not quite realistic, there is nothing we can do unless we also have MACPI experts, where we can actually compare the assessment scores from MACPI officials and MACPI experts. And you might think that they will be really different, but it depends. Sometimes experts provide the same scores as the officials, and it is very interesting when for most policies or activities, officials and experts provide the same or very similar scores, and there are 1 or 2 activities where there are huge discrepancies in the scores by officials and experts. But let's focus more on this in the analytical part. I will talk now about first about the survey, the MACPI official survey. But MACPI experts survey is basically exactly the same. The only difference is one question where we ask officials if they are involved in particular activities, because we ask only questions for the activities the respondent is involved in. And for experts, we ask this question as, are you familiar with these activities? So we ask experts only for activities they're familiar with. They can't be involved usually in these activities, as they are not employees of the organization. And MACP clients, we usually ask victimization questions like, were you asked for a bribe when doing this or that with this organization? I will not focus much on this aspect, as I don't know if it is included in our current project. However, the main idea behind is to verify the actual corruption pressure reports from officials. And usually we find that officials are willing to share information about corruption pressure. I will show you in a moment what this indicator actually means. So let's move to the survey. It is actually step 3 of the whole process, and as Todor presented already steps 1 and 2, I will just summarize them in a minute. So the preparation phase is getting familiar with the organization, finding representatives of the organization. Usually we send a letter and we ask the management or someone above the management, as Todor explained about the minister who helped on this. And we ask them to appoint some representative from the organization who will be, let's say, the spokesperson or the person guiding us through the organization structure and activities. And usually this person is very scared at first what they say and if they will say something wrong, but with time they see that we don't ask of anything scary, no actual details or cases of corruption are discussed. We just ask about the anti-corruption policies of the organization and the threats they perceive, because it would be really strange if they have a lot of anti-corruption policies and they don't think there are corruption risks. We sometimes start our conversation the following way. The representative asks us, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? We explain we are assessing anti-corruption policies. And they say, but there is no corruption in Sofia municipality, for example. What will you assess since there is no corruption? And then we explain that we don't actually assess corruption levels in Sofia municipality, or at least not through this actual instrument, but we assess the quality of their anti-corruption policies. And we believe that if they have anti-corruption policies, then they at least perceive some potential interest towards corruption, even if they don't think that something like corruption exists in a Bulgarian municipality. So we are discussing these potential risks, and they are quite willing to discuss this, although they in the beginning they have difficulties seeing things from our point of view. For them, these are just some secondary regulations that their boss told them to follow, and they don't question why this exists, at least in the beginning. And during in-depth interviews, this is the main purpose, to see how more or less the management of the organization sees their anti-corruption needs. And it is very difficult in some countries and in some organizations, as they do not want to admit that corruption is even hypothetically possible. And when you ask them, okay, why then do you have anti-corruption policies? They struggle to answer, but with 1, 2, or 3 interviews in rare cases, these difficulties are overcome. And the main goal of these first 2 steps is to get a good and concrete list of policies and activities which is meaningful to the actual employees of the organization. Because we've had this case where the management gave us the activities from their website or from some document about the structure of the organization. And in the end, when we were presenting the results, there were some corruption pressures for one of the activity, giving penalties activity or something like that. And the representative of the organization asked me, what do you mean by this activity? What is this activity about? And I was baffled because this was the list he gave me and said that these are the activities of the organization, and I don't work in this organization, so I can't be a specialist in all the organizations. So these first stages are very important, so that the policies and the activities are formulated in a way which will be understandable for the actual people involved in them. So it doesn't need to be clear to everyone in the organization, but people who are involved in them or who are expected to be familiar with these policies or implementing them or enforcing them, they should be able to understand what we mean. And often they do not call things as they are written in the documents of the organization or in the law. They call them something simple. So we try to find some sort of a compromise on how to code these activities and policies so that they are understandable. And once we do this, we have two lists of anti-corruption policies in the organization, usually about between 10 and 15, and of activities of the organization, usually between 5 and 10. And we are ready to implement the survey online. And Todor already explained that the survey is anonymous. And that there is no way for us to understand who is answering the survey, because the dissemination of the link is handled by the management of the organization, while they do not have any way to understand what their employees are answering, what their answers are. At least not on person by person basis. They can see the mean scores, the mean results, which can be sometimes a problem for smaller organizations. Because, for example, if the whole organization is 30 people, then if a department has only 3 employees, then if we present percentages, it can be guessed what they answered, more or less the 3 people. For example, if we say 33% of 3 people answered that there are risks for pressure from above, then it is clear that one of these 3 said there is such risk, and they all 3 might be punished or they might be interrogated. So we generally tend to not provide percentage data from too few respondents. And when the organization is smaller, we have alternative method of computing the indicators, which is average instead of percentage, because the mean scores are more difficult to link to a particular answer. You will see this in a moment, but this is actually the computation of MACP indicators, which is the next step. And I will start by showing you how we implement the survey online. I showed a bit of it yesterday, so I will do this rather briefly and focus on the computation of indicators part. And as I mentioned, MACP experts and MACP clients are optional, but I think in our project we have envisaged MACP experts for the 2nd year, so this might be important to have in mind. And these are complementary, but they sometimes provide really helpful information, especially when we have reasons to believe that officials might be even less honest than usual in their answers. And finally, the analysis of the data and the presentation of the management to the management is the step where reports are drafted, and I will show you after the lunch break the two types of reports we are doing in this stage. So the surveys, the MACPI official survey and the MACPI expert survey is, as I said, almost identical. It is an anonymous representative online survey among the employees of the public organization. And for the representative part to be true, we need at least 300 or 400 employees in larger organizations. Let's say organizations with more than 1,000 employees, like the Bulgarian Border Police, for example. However, many organizations are smaller and have 30 or 40 employees, and MACPI works there as well. We just use exhaustive sampling, which means that everyone from the organization is invited to take part, and we ask the management to help us achieve at least 50% response rate. So at least half of the employees of the organization answer to the survey, and we do this by sending reminders to the management, like we have only 10 of 50 answers so far, we have only 15 of 50 answers, and they keep reminding their employees and asking them to fill it in until we reach, let's say, 30 out of 50. And this is exhaustive sampling. And of course, in some organizations, it doesn't work, and this is very, very seldom, but it happens. And then what we believe is that the management is actually not involved enough in this. So they agree to do MACPI, but they don't really agree to do it. They try to stop the implementation in different ways, and one way is not disseminating it through the organization and asking the employees to fill it in. And we can find evidence for this also by seeing the structure of the respondents. There is a question whether whether employees of the organization are with management functions or without management functions. And in organizations where we can't reach the needed sample size, usually management doesn't participate at all in the survey, or usually only one or two persons from the management take part in the survey, which shows that they don't want to do this. And it is very clear that it is not the case that they are trying their best to have all the employees of the organization fill this in, but they rather do not want to cooperate. So this so far, I think, has happened in one or two maybe organizations from more than 20. So it's rather rare. And the survey has standardized questionnaire, which means that no changes in the questions should be made. So we always have this stage where partners or people who implement the survey, including organizations, they don't like a particular question. They say this question is not clear, or it is not as smart as it could be. But this is a standardized tool, and it has been tested for various parameters like internal consistency of the instruments, of the questions. They are not simple questions. They are instruments of measurement something. And even if there is a better way to put the question, once it is standardized, verified, tested for reliability and internal consistency, and implemented multiple times, then it cannot be changed, even if there is some better version. And in most cases, we would argue that the suggested change is not actually better. But even if it was, it can't be changed. What is changed is the list of activities and policies, since they are the items that are being measured. And they, of course, are specific for the organization, which is where MACP is implemented. And let me show you how it looks like when it is implemented online. And of course, when implemented, you should have in mind this thing about the anonymity. No information about the respondent is recorded. We were asking about their how many years they have worked in the organization before, but we dropped this question as it reveal some personal information, and we were actually not using it for any analysis. We just had it for some background information, but the only question we left for background information is whether the employee has management functions or not, and we do not present aggregated scores from less than at least 3 participants in order to avoid showing what the particular employee, even if it is someone with management functions, actually what scores they provided. And this is how the survey looks like. I think this is in Italian in this case. This question asks if your job is in any way related to some of the following activities, and multiple answers are allowed. So this particular participant selected that his job is related to 3 of the activities, and then they are asked to provide their assessment scores for these 3 activities, not for all of the activities, but only for these 3. And in the case of experts, they are asked how familiar are you with each of these activities, and then they are asked only for about activities they are familiar with. And let me just very briefly show you how it looks like. You can try yourself uploading some questions here. I created a demo profile which has user name demo and password demo. So you simply type gerganov.eu like this and hit enter. And then you will be automatically directed to the WIME survey page, where usually public surveys are displayed. In this case, I don't have any public displays. So to access the survey management system as a survey creator, you need to go to the admin subpage. So you just write admin after the slash, and you get this login window where you write demo as a user, and password is also demo. And I think we can have multiple users with the same username and password access this. It is of course not good practice, and you shouldn't do it, and you should have stronger passwords, but this profile will be available only for 2 or 3 days for you to test as homework exercise after the training. And we get this sometimes. I think it is related to maybe other users trying to access at the same time. I'm not sure. In previous versions, I'm sure we could all use the same username and password. Okay, now probably only one can do it. So if you have the same outcome, this would mean that someone else is. Oh no! Look, now I managed to log in. So now I managed to log in. But even if I'm kicked out because someone else went in, it's not a problem. I can go through my admin profile, which which has all the permissions. This demo profile has permissions only to change this survey we created yesterday. This is the SCAT TSL survey, or rather its first question, because this is how much time we had yesterday. And I will stop the survey now, which will delete all the answers we've collected so far. So it warns us that if we deactivate it, it will archive the responses we have collected. And I can actually use I can set the general settings of the survey from here. I can add welcome screen and end screen from the text elements and so on. These are some survey settings on the top left. And when I want to add questions and question groups, I come here to the survey menu. And I already have one question, so I will use it. I will just edit it to reflect MACP questionnaire. And if you want to ask me how do you see MACP questionnaire, it would be a great question. It is in the methodological toolkit. So the state capture assessment on sectoral level, the toolkit I started the presentation with, it has the MACP questionnaire in its appendix. So this is the SCAT TSL questionnaire we covered yesterday. And these are some other things. And this is the MACP questionnaire, or sometimes we call it MACP institutional, because MACP is a larger set of tools. And the actual survey is called MACP official survey because of the target group. And you can see here the different questions. I will return to them later, as we discussed how our indicators computed. But now I will adapt Q1 to MACP, and you might notice other similarities because some of the indicators in the SCAT TSL questionnaire are actually inspired by MACP officials. And here are the answer options. I don't know if you let me just increase a bit the font and show you how you access the answer options. You when you select the question, so you go to the list of questions and then you select edit question, this pen icon, and there actually I don't need to edit the question itself, but I need to edit its answer options. So here it is, edit answer options, this button, and then I go to my questionnaire and I select the correct options. And note that this says 2, this says 3. These are IDs. These are not always numbers. In this case, these are like IDs of the question, because we had option 1, which was top level management, and we deleted this option because it was too revealing to the identity of the respondent, because there are very few top management usually. And here it is, staff member with management functions, code 2. and staff member without management functions, which is called 3. And now we can save and close this question. And we can preview the survey. And before I have activated it, we cannot collect any responses. So I will just activate it. And then when your survey is ready, what you should do is send this link. It also has the same structure. Your server one survey can be written there, or sometimes it is not. It depends on how you set the server, but there is always this index PHP and the number of the survey, which is this 6-digit number. So you send this link or a shorter link. If you want to make it more convenient for the employees, you can create a shorter, easier to remember link, and you send this link first to the management so that they can go through the questionnaire and see that you are not asking any sensitive information, like, for example, whether your boss is doing illegal stuff. We do not ask anything like that. So the management can see this, they can verify that everything is okay with the questionnaire. They can see that it is not too long, because when sometimes when you show them this thing here, they say, oh, this will take hours, days, it is incredibly long. I don't know how, we are very busy. The employees will not want to answer it because they are really busy. And then when we send the actual online version, they see that it is rather fast, and it takes no more than half an hour for a regular employee. And it might take longer if they for employees with management functions, because they are usually involved somehow in many of the activities. And also they claim that they know all the anti-corruption policies, because it is not possible that a management representative doesn't know all the anti-corruption policies. So they say that they know all of them. So for them, the survey might be slightly longer, but ideally someone with management functions would want to cooperate with us if they indeed want to improve their anti-corruption lineup. So with this, let me stop with that, because there are other more detailed one survey tutorials, and you can even learn it by clicking and trying different things. It is not that difficult to learn how to do it. And there are, of course, other platforms like SurveyMonkey, like many others. It just needs to have filters, because for example, I think that Google Forms don't have filters. Filters means that based on your answers, further questions are filtered. So you are asked only those of the questions which are relevant in your case, because we do not want to have all the activities or policies here being assessed by someone who is not involved in them or who is not familiar with them. So the software needs to handle filters. And of course, it would be convenient if it can export data in a useful way. I've already shown yesterday how to export data in Excel, and you can also export it to SPSS if you use SPSS. It creates a nice syntax file, which will create an SPSS file with the labels. And there is some other thing you can do. You can use the statistics. Let me just add another answer here so that we have. By the way, you can also limit the number of answers per computer through cookies. You can set the settings so that it doesn't allow me to add more than one answers. But we usually don't do this because in some organizations, different employees might be using the same computer. So we trust that they will be honest, and if they are not, it shows in the actual data. So this button shows you some statistics, and you can, for example, let me put the simple mode. This is the first question: are you a staff member with management or without management functions? I will run it in more table format because it doesn't visualize well right now. Here it is. You just select it and you click view statistics, I think. And here it is. It gives you the counts and it gives you some percentages too, but I think it is trivial for anyone to compute percentages from counts. So basically what you need is counts, and if you need to filter by something, for example, if you want to filter only those who gave complete surveys, or only those who had actually you don't need those with incomplete ones, but you can also select filters like only staff members with management functions, and you can see answers only for them. Here it is. So of course, for Q1, it shows 100% of the members with management functions set their members with management functions. But for the other questions, you can basically extract the counts from this platform without even using software like SPSS or making any computations in Excel. You need only to compute the percentages, or you can even get them from here in some cases if you handle the response filters correctly. So now let me start with the indicators, and I will continue with them in the next presentation because I focused too long on the survey. So the computation of MACP indicators, this is more or less how it's done. We have in the toolkit these tables where all indicators are listed to the left, and to the right you have basically what the indicator means, which also tells you how to compute it. So for example, outside pressure associated with activity is the percentage of people who answered that there is some level of pressure, high, medium, or low. So how do we compute this? Let's first see in the toolkit where is this indicator outside pressure associated with activity. So it is part of the estimated corruption pressure. You can see here the question codes which are used to compute this group of indicators, and outside pressure associated with activity is linked to question Q8. And you can see here the same explanation I just read, but in addition, to make it even more clear, if possible, we wrote here the answer codes. So basically, it's the percentage of people who answered 4 or 3 or 2. And let's check Q8, how it looks like. So this is Q8. What would you say that external pressure for corruption transactions, bribes, lobbying, etc., for the following activity or activities is high, medium, low, or no pressure at all? And we take the percentage of people who selected there is at least some pressure for corruption transactions. This is more or less it. And it is exactly the same for the susceptibility to pressure from above, for the susceptibility to pressure from outside, and for all indicators. However, you might notice in the toolkit that in some of the tables, for example, in the tables for the template technical report, we don't use percentages, but we formulate the same indicators in slightly different manner. This is the same indicator, outside pressure associated with activity. So we defined this in this case as the external pressure for bribes on a scale from 1 to 4, where 1 is no pressure at all, 4 is high pressure. So we suggest using this scale and the mean values on this scale from 1 to 4 in smaller organizations, because let's imagine that we have a small organization of 30 employees or 40 employees. We generally don't recommend using MACPI in such small organizations for various reasons. For example, everyone knows each other, people are much more guarded and closed, and they just try to give the politically correct answer to every question. And generally, MACPI is directed to larger organizations where the management of the organization cannot, let's say, control directly what the low-level employees do. For example, in the border police, it totally makes sense to use MACPI, since there are many corruption cases linked, for example, to transfer of refugees, or rather migrants, illegal migrants, because refugees don't need to be transferred, but illegal migrants, and the border police, some of them take bribes to let the human traffickers through, and this is not supported by the management. Let's say the management would like to stop this activity, but if you have a very small organization with 20 people who work in the same office, you basically know more or less everything about what people do. So it is not really feasible to have corruption without at least some knowledge from the top management. So MACPI there doesn't make so much sense, but if you have to use it in such an organization, then we recommend using the mean values. And what does this mean? Let's say Q8. This is actually called a Likert scale. So it is a scale from 1 to 4. It is the same type of scale as if I asked you how much do you like this training from 1 to 10, where 1 is I hate it and 10 is I like it very much. And this is the same type of a Likert scale, which can be processed as the same type of scale as temperature, for example, or any other interval scale. We can imagine that this Likert scale is close to an interval scale, and we can simply compute the mean value. So here, these answer codes, they are not just answer IDs, let's say, but they're meaningful numbers which can be treated as a scale from 1, which is no pressure at all, to 4, which is high. So let's see again what this approach to computing the indicator says. So it says on a scale from 1 to 4, where 1 is no pressure at all, 4 is high pressure. Okay, so it's the same as in the questionnaire. Sometimes it is reversed because we would like to have the direction of the indicator to always show the same. So higher values, in our case for the activities, they show higher corruption pressure. In the case of activities, higher values show that the policies are better. The higher their scores are, the better they are in different respects. So here we do not have to reverse the scale. We simply compute the mean value. And this is how this looks like in practice. This is, let me switch to activities, and I will zoom it a little bit. There are some labels in Bulgarian. Please just ignore them. And this was computed with SPSS. However, it is not that difficult to compute the same with Excel. The only more difficult thing is the standard error of the mean, which you have to use formula for. But the mean values, the formula is really trivial. It's just equals average, and you select the values you want to average. So if we have here the scale from 1 to 4, you will see that the exact medium part of the scale is 2.5 actually. So if the mean is below 2.5, this means below average. If it is above 2.5 on this scale from 1 to 4, it is above average. And here you can see a table where, so Q1, it just says you are, if you remember. And again, look at the codes. What was code 2 and what was code 3? Code 2 was employee with management functions, and code 3 was an employee without management functions. Here I have split the results for Q8, and this is activity 1. So after the underscore, it is the ID of the activity. So this is Q8, the outside pressure for activity 1. This is for activity 2. This is for activity 3, and so on. And here I have also the label of the activity, but I don't need this. I just need the code, the ID, the number. And here I have the mean score of employees with management functions, the mean score for employees without management functions, and the total mean score, so from everyone. And I can see valid n, it shows the number of respondents who produced this score. So the total number of respondents who assessed this activity 1, it's probably human resources, was 31. The number of employees without management functions who scored it is 9, and those with management functions who scored it is 22. For most of the activities, there are fewer employees with management functions. Like here you see that these are 5, these are 13. Here we have 4 with management functions, 43 without management functions, and so on. We basically, what we present in our table is this breakdown. We have all the employees. I will show you after lunch, I will show you how the technical report looks like. We have the mean scores of all employees. with the standard error in brackets, and the standard error here shows how much their answers varied. For example, in my example in the beginning with the two experts who gave very different scores, the standard error will be very high in this case. But if all the employees tend to give similar scores, then this error will be relatively low. And here you have the manager score, so 22 employees with management functions, and this is their score. And this is the score of the regular employees. And here we are usually interested in the difference between the two when there are some differences. And we analyze this and interpret this. I will show you in the analytical part of the tutorial. And this is the rank of the activity. The rank basically means where this score is from all the activities. So these are all 8 activities in this organization. So the highest score is rank 1, the second highest is rank 2, and so on to rank 8. So here rank 8 for employees, we do not have experts here, so this is basically left empty. So rank 8 here means that this score 1.9 is supposed to be the lowest of all scores for this indicator. And you can see that there are 2 with 1.1, but one is probably slightly lower. So this one is the lowest. This means that this is what rank 8 means, the last in rank in terms of this particular score. I'm stressing so much about this because I had a question on how to compute ranks, and this is how. You can do it manually by simply looking at all the scores on this indicator for the different activities and see if this is the highest or the lowest or the 6th, for example. And of course, I did it semi-automatically with this Excel file. The problem here is that it cannot be directly used for another organization. It needs to be slightly adjusted. And you need to know what this formula mean in order to adjust it, but the same can be done manually relatively fast. So let me stop now and ask you if you have any questions at this point, because I suggest we have the lunch break after that. And we can, of course, address any questions regarding the computation of indicators after lunch, and discuss any part of this presentation then as well.
Hello.
Yes.
I have one question.
Of course.
First of all, best regard for everybody. I have one question: how to calculate corruption pressure for activity, because that question we have no in the survey.
Okay, great question. Thank you. So I'll try to be relatively brief. If I see that it takes too much time to explain, we will explain it after lunch. So the first step is to go to the table in the toolkit of the MACP indicators and to check what it says about corruption pressure. So we see that there are 2 types of corruption pressure, estimated and actual. We are talking about actual corruption pressure here. So it is the percentage of people who answered that at least in some cases they were offered directly or indirectly a bribe or were threatened during the last year. And these are the answers which count as being offered directly or indirectly a bribe? And we can see this question 812 in the questionnaire. So here it is. Whenever you have worked with citizens or employees of other institutions, how often in the last year they have directly offered something to you, money, gift, favor in return for you doing some service for them, or not offer directly, but show that they would give something in return for you doing some services for them. And we have in all cases, in most cases, in isolated cases, in no cases. And we basically recompute for every participant in the survey whether they were offered a bribe at least once, at least in isolated cases in the previous year, or in no cases for both questions. And we have for every participant a number which is either 0 or 1. 1 means they were offered a bribe, at least in some cases, or they were shown they could be offered a bribe, at least in some cases. And this means that this particular respondent is subject to corruption pressure. And then if we have, let's say, 50 employees and 10 of them were offered a bribe, then we can compute that for the whole organization, actual corruption pressure is 20%. So the question now is, how do we do this for particular activities? And the answer is the same way. For activity 7, for activity 1, so this Q7, it asks the respondent if their work is involved in this particular activity, human resources in this case. For this activity, we have let's see how many. We have 31 employees who were involved somehow in this activity. And we are looking at how many of them were offered a bribe during the previous year. And we see here that 7 were offered a bribe. So the resulting percentage for this activity is 22%, as you can see here, because the first activity, let me zoom it a bit. The first activity is human resources. And now you will probably disagree with this, because you'll say, oh, wait, but maybe they were not offered a bribe for human resources. Maybe they are working in other activities too, and they were offered a bribe for something else. And of course, this is the case, and this is somewhat problematic for smaller organizations. So there we usually provide a disclaimer that we do not know whether these employees were offered a bribe doing this particular activity. However, you should know that you cannot ask such details directly. You cannot ask the employees how exactly were you offered this bribe, who offered it to you, when, why, and so on, because then they delete even the answer that they were offered a bribe in some cases, because they understand that this is not the politically correct answer, and they simply provide, in no cases, no one offers any bribe, there is no corruption here. So we have tried asking in the context of which activity this bribe was offered, and this is what happened. So this is a proxy. In any case, corruption pressure is a proxy indicator. It doesn't show real corruption cases. However, we found out that being offered a bribe correlates very high with actually accepting one. So in a sense, it doesn't matter if some employee who works on 5 activities were offered a bribe as part of activity 3, this particular employee was subject to corruption pressure. And it means that this corruption pressure, if he tends to accept it for one activity, he would accept something similar for any activity. So this is the logic behind this indicator, and it is computed simply as the percentage of employees involved in a certain activity who are offered a bribe. And if the activity is very low threat, like for example, let's say database maintenance and management and access to information systems, maybe the NRA will claim that this is a low threat activity. However, 20% of the employees involved in this activity were offered bribes. So it doesn't matter if they were offered bribes as part of doing this activity, but as something else. These employees were subject to corruption pressure, which also, we believe, increases the threat level for this particular activity too. And if there are any doubts if this activity is actually high risk or not so much high risk, then MACP experts can provide the final word, let's say. But we give these numbers. So in larger organizations, people tend to work only on one activity. So it is not a problem there. But for smaller organizations where everyone works on everything, these percentages might not make so much sense. So there we provide a disclaimer, and it is up to the analyst who is doing the analytical interpretation of the data whether to interpret these percentages or not. So I will tell you more about this, which will further answer this question after the lunch break. And I suggest we have 1 hour lunch break, and then we will have shorter second training, which will cover parts of the indicator computation as well.
Thank you, Alex. So I really suggest that now we go and enjoy our lunch, and let's get back in exactly 1 hour.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. So let's start with finishing the previous part, which is, of course, related to the analysis. So it cannot be really divided, the computation of the indicators from the analysis. So let me share my screen again. And this is more or less the end of the previous presentation. I just demonstrated here the tables from the toolkit where it says what different indicators mean or how they are computed. And I would like to invite everyone to ask questions, if anything, about the computation of the indicators is not clear. And then we'll move to the interpretation of the indicators, what these numbers actually mean. So please, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand or take the floor or write in the chat, doesn't matter.
Sorry, I have one question. To be clear, on my previous question, I need to filter one single activity and calculate percent of people who told that they just a minute, sorry. For corruption pressure in activity, I need to select one activity in filter. Am I correct?
Yes, This is one way you can do it. Another way is to have a crosstab. It's basically the same.
Okay. Okay.
So basically in the SPSS, you have for actual corruption pressure, you have for every respondent either 1 or 0. So 1 means that this respondent was offered a bribe in some form, at least in some cases. 0 means that in no case they report being offered a bribe. And here you have Q7, which is the activity number. So first activity, second activity, third activity, and so on. And typically, in larger organizations, you have one respondent working in one activity, since these activities are related to the departments usually. But in smaller organizations, it is possible that a particular respondent works in several activities. It doesn't really matter. What you do is either filter only those respondents who work on this activity, and then compute the percentage from the actual corruption pressure variable, or you make a cross tabulation. It's exactly the same. So you can make cross tabulations with multiple answers. Here, this is one such cross tabulation in Excel. If it is difficult, you can do it by filtering in Excel, or you can even add a pivot table, which will do the same, more or less. So here you can filter it, or you can have them you can have the average. So for example, you can have the activities in the columns. And here the average will give you, it will give you the number for, okay, I don't think you can do it like this. So you will have to filter it through a pivot table too. Maybe there is a way with pivot table, but Excel is not that handy. So here in our example, just Q7-1 doesn't have any cases. This one has, so we can filter it through here, or we can put it in rows and see what is the average. So this 0-1, this is actually who works in activity 3. So we are interested only in this number, those who work in activity 3, and this is the average of actual corruption pressure, which is the same as the percentage if they are coded as 0 and 1s. So there are different ways to do it, but basically it comes down to selecting one activity and computing the percentage of 1s from all employees involved in this particular activity. So if you want some further follow-up, please let me know. And are there any other questions regarding how some particular indicator is computed? Okay, seems no further questions regarding this aspect. So let me move to the analysis part. And again, this is the toolkit where everything we are talking about is described in detail. And in some cases, if some detail is not clear, you can, of course, always ask, and it will be explained. But typically, it is what it says, just the most natural interpretation of what is said in the textbook, even in the toolkit, even if it might seem not logical somewhere. It should be interpreted straightforward. And this is, again, this is the first publication where the theory behind MACP is explained in more detail, including the bias in the answers of employees. We called it institutional bias or institutional patriotism in this book, and gave some examples how different employees from different organizations tend to be the more likely or less likely to provide only positive answers, to say everything is great, there is no corruption, but at the same time anti-corruption policies are very effective, which I guess would be some, from theoretical point, some ideal situation when there is a lot of corruption pressure, but no corruption at all can take place because there are some perfect policies, and the moral integrity of the employees is extremely high as possible of everyone. So there are, in this book, we have actually computed the percentage of employees who provide such answers, that everything is perfect, and compared several public organizations on this, let's say, secondary indicator. But what it, from practical point of view, what we are focusing on today is how to implement this in practical terms. And the analysis is the final step. And there are two outputs from this step. One is optional, one is more or less obligatory. So the obligatory step is a technical report which is given to the management of the organization, and there is also a presentation if they requested. So this technical report is basically a confidential document which is produced only for the management. It is not intended to be read by the general population, the general public, or by other organizations. So typically when we send this technical report, we don't expect the management to have any requirements for changes, because it is for them. For example, they don't like some number, let's say the actual corruption pressure associated with activity 7, and they say there are only 5 people involved in this activity and they're involved in other activities as well, so we don't like this number. Can you do something about it? And then we usually try to explain that this report is only for them. We explain what is the meaning of this indicator, and if no one else is viewing this document, there is no need to revise anything. On the other hand, sometimes, as Todor explained, these reports are not public, but they're used for other organizations as part of their obligatory anti-corruption assessment that in some countries public organizations have to make. And then they might have some remarks, some comments, and require some changes if they don't believe that some conclusion or some data point represents the reality. And then, of course, you can discuss with them. And if they have a point, often they do, then, of course, you can amend this. However, usually technical report, I will show you how it looks like. It basically consists of a lot of tables like this. And let me show you a template which will be available to everyone who doesn't have it. This template basically it says a benchmarking scan, because it is very seldom that we do consecutive scans, and this is one analytical problem, because MACP is not intended as a one-time exercise. It is monitoring, so it should be done regularly. The first implementation, which we call a benchmarking scan, basically it only gives the reference values, and only consecutive scans can show if this public organization is actually improving or not. And we are not interested in saying this organization is good or bad or anything like this. We are interested in improving the anti-corruption policy setup of any organization, regardless of whether it is good or bad in terms of curbing corruption. So the benchmarking scan is the least informative report possible, which you can produce with MACP. Yet, unfortunately, this is often what we have to do. We have replicated MACP in several organizations like the Bulgarian Border Police and the Bulgarian Traffic Police, and the second reports were much more informative than the first ones. But unless you do MACP in an organization where you've already done it before, then you only have this benchmarking scan technical report. And it consists of summary, a short introduction. It's a 2-page introduction, which we always include because it presents the tool to the management so that they know what this is, they know where to read more about it. They know where they can read further information on the topic and other implementations of MACP and so on. And then we basically present the actual corruption pressure levels in the organization, which we just covered how it is computed. And if the organization is small, so these numbers don't necessarily represent unique cases of respondents who are working only on one activity, then we can give a disclaimer here explaining how things are, but more or less this provides some general information, which again, it is only for the management at this point. And this is a sneak peek in other organizations. So this can show where the organization stands compared to other public organizations where MACP was implemented in terms of overall actual corruption pressure in the organization. And of course, there is a disclaimer that these organizations are not directly comparable. Even if we take a municipality, let's say the municipality of Riva del Garda, Italy, and another municipality, Burgas Municipality, Bulgaria, they're not comparable. These are different countries, different realities, and these numbers should not be compared, but they provide some very general notion of what the corruption pressure generally is for this public organization. And even two municipalities in Bulgaria, they are not comparable, since Slatina municipality is a very small municipality of one neighborhood in Sofia, which is 30 or 40 employees, and Burgas municipality is a very large municipality of the fourth or fifth largest city in Bulgaria. So these are not comparable with each other, but they're comparable with themselves. So if we compare traffic police 2015 with traffic police 2016, this is the way this is supposed to be used, and to see if the overall corruption pressure declines with time. So this number, while we provided for general information and for general context, we don't interpret it and we don't analyze it. We don't say, oh, look, municipalities in Italy are much better than municipalities in Bulgaria. It might be implied by the data, but we explicitly explain that they are not supposed to be compared, but municipality of Riva del Garda is supposed to try to lower this percentage even further. So they're supposed to do another MACP scan, and if this number is, let's say, 4, then corruption pressure has declined, but if it is 10, then it has increased, and this basically means that the management should try to address potential vulnerabilities in the anti-corruption setup. And this is where the main added value of the technical report is. The technical report tries to juxtapose different indicators and different sources of information in order to show where potential vulnerabilities are. And I will show you in a moment how this is done. This part of the report is also standard. It explains what potential corruption interest is, and there is this table. And sometimes when people implemented MACP reach this table, they look at it and say, oh, wow, potential corruption interest zones. What is this and how do we compute it? And it is also mentioned here, corruption is interest, risk recognized by the management, abuse of power present, abuse of property absent. Where do we get this information from? And then, of course, my immediate answer is, please first refer to the toolkit, which explicitly states that the second step, the in-depth interviews, they are not some general qualitative instrument where everyone can do whatever they want, but it is an instrument which is mainly supposed to produce these tables. And the anti-corruption policies, the list of anti-corruption policies should be linked to these tables. For example, in the in-depth interview, the representative of the organization says, okay, there is abuse of property for activity 2. Then the natural question is, okay, you think that there is such possibility, what do you do to prevent it then? What are your policies to prevent this? And in the beginning, they usually have difficulties thinking like that about things, because for many of them, anti-corruption policies are something completely dissociated from corruption risks, even if they are even when they're supposed to make annual anti-corruption risk assessments. You might have noticed we do not measure risk, as risk is very particular concept, and it requires to assess both cost and probability, which we cannot assess for something as hidden as corruption. We assess corruption pressure, which is something much more, let's say, proxier to corruption than actual risk. But they're supposed to assess risk, yet they cannot state where the risks are and what are their anti-corruption policies to prevent them. So in this stage, you typically have to guide them and to make them understand the logic that when you say that potential corruption interest might be there, then ideally you have some measures to try to prevent this, since someone might be interested in involving their officials in corruption transactions. This is the purpose of the in-depth interviews, to understand what is the view of the management about the risks in the organization, where they see the risks, what type of risks they see, and what are their measures to prevent these risks. This is basically a way of, since this report is for the actual management, this is a way of structuring their way of thinking on this topic. We just show them their own view. Let's say they say there is abuse of property here, here, and here. And then we juxtapose this view with the actual scores from the employees for activity 8, activity 9, activity 10. And we show where the employees of the organizations as a general see potential risks and where external experts see these risks. And excuse me, this is done in the following tables. So this is one example of a table. These are the different indicators. And in this case, it is about a policy. Let's start with the policies first. So there are three groups of indicators: implementability, implementation, and effectiveness. And implementability basically means how stupid the policy is, to be blunt about it. An example we often give in terms of low implementability of a policy is when the Bulgarian traffic police, they implemented the following anti-corruption measure. There was a high level of corruption in traffic police. And to prevent it, they introduced the measure that traffic police officers should not carry on them more than €5 during their work hours. And this was it was in the past, it was many years ago, but this was one way they tried to fight corruption. And it was stupid because, first of all, you cannot go and check how much money traffic officers carry. If they try to enforce this measure, it will be very humiliating. And also, traffic officers started hiding their personal money they want to carry on their body. They started hiding them in their socks, and it led to many stupid situations. And ultimately, if someone wants to be involved in corruption, they can always hide the money. Or even there are many cases where police officers are actually not doing this during their work hours, but they act outside of work hours to stop drivers in a particular place where there are a lot of violations of traffic laws, and basically extort them for a bribe. Such policies, they do not really address the problem here. And it is often the case with many general policies like general survey, camera surveillance in the organization. Okay, there is camera surveillance, but can you watch what everyone is doing any moment of time? And what if they negotiate their corruption transaction outside of the office? It is not something which is directly connected to possible scenarios of where corruption might take place. And this is why often employees, as well as external experts, might provide very low implementability scores for such policies. The implementation is another important indicator. In this case, we divide this indicator into two parts, formal compliance and real compliance. And the formal compliance consists of the indicators, how aware employees of the organization are with this policy.
Alex,
So,
sorry,
yes?
but we cannot see, you cannot share your screen.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you, Danny. I was showing before this table where the different indicators are. And here are the scores from all the employees in the organization. And if experts are available, here are their scores. If they're not available, we typically leave it empty, but leave the column anyway as a reminder that this survey among the experts could really complement these results. Here is the rank of the particular indicator. And these numbers, they depend on the particular organization. So this is always between 1 and the number of policies in this case. So if there are 12 policies, as in the example, then this number is correct. But if there are 15 policies, then the rank can be between 1 and 15. This is also true for the activities, of course. And let me zoom it a bit. And what I explained was about the implementability and these two indicators, what is the practical meaning behind these. And now I moved to the implementation indicators, these three indicators. What we distinguish between two types of implementation from a theoretical point of view. The formal compliance is how aware are employees with the particular policy. You will see that most of them are aware with all the policies, and how they believe, how strictly they believe that the policy is implemented. While the real compliance is whether there is strict control for implementing, for enforcing this policy. For example, video surveillance. Is there strict control that everyone is surveyed through video cameras all the time? Does anyone watch about it? What if someone disappears from the camera? Is it a problem? Same for declarations of assets and incomes. Does everyone hand these declarations? And most importantly, what happens when someone gives this declaration? Is it checked? Is it verified? Is it true? Is it false? Who checks? How do they check? And so on. This is the real compliance, the actual enforcement of this policy. So this indicator is very important, and usually we find out that control is much lower than the formal compliance. So we have many anti-corruption policies on paper, but there is not so much strict control. And for some policies, it is actually difficult. Let's say the code of conduct, the code of ethics we discussed. Okay, it is It is secondary legislation, which basically usually it builds upon already existing laws. For example, laws for public procurement, laws for conflict of interest, laws for corruption, because corruption is illegal. You don't need a code of conduct to tell you that it is illegal to take a bribe from someone. And usually code of conduct says that, for example, it is not okay to meet with a businessman who is applying for a public tender before the public tender results are announced, or even after that. It is not appropriate to meet with them in the cafe below your office building. It is regulated how and when you can meet with citizens or business representatives, and this is what code of conduct and similar documents and as well as trainings usually have. And it is more or less common sense. People who are involved in corruption, they know they are involved in corruption, and they probably know that it is punishable by law. At least in most European countries they do, because corruption is very often the main topic of the day, and it is discussed all the time. So adding such prescriptive measures is usually not very effective, which is measured by these effectiveness indicators, and it is usually not very strictly implemented, by which I mean real compliance, real implementation. It is not controlled very strictly, and in many cases it is not possible to have strict control. There is no mechanism to control strictly whether this policy is followed or not. In this case, for this particular policy, the rank employees gave for strict control is 1. So this is the highest control in the organization, and you can see that the value here is 4.8 on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is completely agree. So basically, almost everyone agreed completely that there is strict control for this policy. However, one thing we analyze here are differences between experts and different groups of officials. And usually what you have from MACPI officials only are these 2 columns: employees with management functions and employees without management functions. And let me show you how large these discrepancies can be in some cases. I hope you can see this slide. So this is from border police, and you can see in red the regular employees and in blue the management. And for the 2 activities where regular employees are mainly involved, which is the border security, they patrol the border basically, and the border checkpoints where they operate the checkpoints and check passengers and work together with the customs to find smuggling and so on. There, the regular employees say that susceptibility to pressure from outside is very low, which is basically saying that we and our colleagues would not be willing to take bribes no matter what. But the management involved on these activities quite disagree on this and say, especially for the border checkpoints, that the risks are much higher than what regular employees admits. So this discrepancy is usually pointed out to the management, and sometimes it is interesting when it is the other way around, like in the preventive investigation. Then the management are on the defense, saying that no, of course, this is a high level, let's say, activity where higher level stuff is involved. So of course they tend to say that there is no risk whatsoever there. while the regular employees might point out that there are some risks. They might be more honest than the management. And this particular scenario is always analyzed because it shows that the management view on the pressure associated with this activity might not be really adequate. And in some cases, like here, public procurement, everyone agreed that the risk is relatively high. And we pointed out that public procurement for the border police was one of the highest both actual corruption pressure and assessed corruption pressure activities, while the management in the beginning, they said that there is no possibility of corruption in public procurement for border police because there was the law and there were the sums of money they were spending were not that high. They were usually buying paper or something like that. And several years after we presented these results, the presentation was public. Everyone was present, including journalists. And several years after we presented these findings and pointed the attention of the management to public procurement for border police, there were actually some very large scandals for very large issues in procurement with tenders by border police, which were actually for very large sums of money. So here, even if it is not the main goal of MACPI, it showed potential vulnerabilities which were not directly accepted in the beginning, but later the reality showed that we were completely right about this. And these are some interesting changes in the discrepancies between the two waves. So on the left, you can see the border security discrepancies for 2015 and the 2016, and you can see that both the discrepancy is still there. There is still 10% difference, but also the overall levels for the for the assessed corruption pressure for this activity increased in 2016, and you might remember then it was the migrant crisis which started. As for the border checkpoints, they actually did a lot of reforms in 2015. And you can see how the huge discrepancy in the border checkpoints assessments was actually much lower in the second wave. So both the employees with and without management functions gave similar assessment of the risk. And we basically have other sources of information which suggest that indeed the anti-corruption measures for the border checkpoints were improved. And this change in the discrepancies is something you can analyze if you do this full cycle. Let me show you the full cycle. So if we do this full cycle of analysis, then we can do this analysis over time. So the idea is first the benchmarking scan, then anti-corruption policy analysis, improving the policies and covering vulnerabilities, and finally another MACPI diagnostic scan. And ideally, we imagine the trend graphs, the long-term graphs, to look like something like this. We focus, for example, on activity N, introduce new anti-corruption policies, and we manage to decrease corruption pressure for this activity. And maybe for activity 2 as well. And some anti-corruption measures might help some activities, but they might have negative impact on others. The whole idea is to have MACPI regularly, not only once. But for the first benchmarking scan, this technical report, it basically gives vulnerability areas. And after you compute the indicators, the way you analyze this is basically you most often look at the ranks, because these numbers, they're informative, but they're very high for most of the organizations. Because if you do only public officials, if you do experts, experts often disagree, and there you look at discrepancies. For example, here you can say that here there is a small discrepancy, but typically you look for larger ones. But when you don't have experts, basically you can look at discrepancies only between these two groups. And the most important information is the rank within the organization, how high this policy is rated compared to the other policies in the organization. And what you typically do, these are the tables with the activities. So as I mentioned, this is taken from the in-depth interviews from step 2 of the MACP implementation, and we showed how some of these are calculated, the actual corruption pressure and the outside corruption pressure and susceptibility to pressure and so on. So we check where this activity is on compared to the other activities in the organization, whether it is seen as a high-risk activity in the organization or as a low-risk activity. And then we look at this anti-corruption policy coverage, and this is the coverage indicator we discussed. And let me show you which question leads to this indicator. I open the questionnaire here. So basically the question linked to coverage is this one. In your opinion, to which of the following activities is this policy applicable? Please check all that apply. So, of course, some employees tend to check all the activities. So, to which this policy is applicable? Oh, it is applicable to all the activities. It is a great policy. Code of conduct, applicable to all. Anti-corruption trainings are applicable to all activities. And this is why we have some percentages, even in cases where it is not really applicable. For example, here, this policy 6 is probably not applicable to this particular activity, but still 1/3 of the respondents gave some said that it was applicable. So we have adopted a 70% threshold, and we consider good coverage only if at least 70% of the employees who are familiar with this policy say that this policy is applicable to this activity. Now, this is what we consider good coverage. And of course, what you can do is compare these answers. So you can see these are the official ratings, and they basically say that everything is applicable to everything else. But when you take the experts ranking, they are much more honest. And sometimes, of course, the officials themselves are ranking in a more balanced way. For example, this is the National Revenue Agency of Bulgaria, and these are the scores which the officials of the National Revenue Agency provided. So you can see that some policies are very, very specific and targeted to particular activities. And this is usually the best possible scenario when a particular policy targets one or two of the activities and not the rest, and the other activities are targeted by other very specific policies. This is the best scenario. But what we are actually looking here is whether this is a high risk activity where the ranks are, and whether it has good coverage. One of the tables which Todor also presented was this one. We juxtapose the actual corruption pressure scores with the coverage. So ideally, where there is high actual corruption pressure and high estimated corruption pressure, you expect to have a lot of coverage. For example, this activity is public procurement. While where there is low corruption pressure, you can have lower coverage. However, here you can see, let's say that for activity 2, we have so much coverage that the actual corruption pressure dropped. This is what we generally would expect, so this looks really good. However, we have some activities like activity 4 and activity 9, which have quite high actual corruption pressure, and they have no coverage whatsoever. Okay, it might be some problem with the indicator, then we can look at the estimated corruption pressure. And if the estimated corruption pressure is also low, then we can check the experts' assessments. And if they also agree that it is low, then it might be some problem with the indicator, some bias due to employees with management functions working on different activities. However, in most of the cases, you find out that the experts agree that there is risk for this particular activity. There are cases in the media and everywhere linking this particular activity to corruption, and there are many data-driven sources which confirm that coverage for this activity should be higher. So this is what we basically say in the benchmarking report. Okay, maybe look at this activity. It needs better coverage. We say, for example, this activity 2 is public procurement. However, here it is public procurement, and it has great coverage and low actual corruption pressure. So things are great there. However, the next activity, this one, activity 3, it is preparation of tenders and specifications, participation in procurement and contracting, and so on. So this activity is really linked to public procurement. And here the actual corruption pressure is much higher, and the anti-corruption policies are not really that applicable to this particular activity. And what we found out for this organization is that actually the vulnerabilities are through this activity, as the public procurement is very, very well handled. However, the preparation of tenders, the people creating the specifications and so on, this was not so well covered by anti-corruption policies, and it was a potentially vulnerable area given the high risk associated with public procurement. And these are the type of findings we present to the management. We are looking for high-risk activities with bad coverage, and we are looking for discrepancies between different groups of respondents. Like, for example, I don't know, I think I saw somewhere here it is. Discrepancy between the employees and the experts regarding outside pressure associated with activity. So here we say, look at this discrepancy. The employees of the involved in this activity, they tend to not assess this risk adequately. So probably additional efforts should be made to analyze the potential risks, the potential corruption interest, the possible mechanisms, because according to the experts, there is outside pressure associated with this activity. And I suggest we wrap up here because this is more or less the time where when we were supposed to finish this training. And I will give the floor to anyone who wants to ask questions or comment. Please, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know.
Yes, I had a question actually. What do you do when you've got a discrepancy between results from your survey with the management and with the workers, with the people that are not in the management, and also when you have a discrepancy between experts and employees working for the organization? How do you analyze it, assess it?
So what do we do? In the technical report, we just say there is this discrepancy here. It is the largest discrepancy. You might notice that there are no discrepancies in the other indicators. And there were no discrepancies in this particular public organization for other activities. So we basically, for the technical report, as it is for the management, we just say, look at this particular indicator in this particular activity, there is a discrepancy there. So analyze it more carefully. Here we have very good coverage, so it is more or less not a big problem. However, at least the employees associated with this organization, maybe during their next anti-corruption training, they should be informed that they're underestimating the outside corruption pressure for this activity. But when there is no good coverage, for example, they say that there is no outside corruption pressure, there is no pressure from above, no one is interested of evading the regulation, and the experts disagree with that, and at the same time there is no coverage, then we say this is a vulnerable area which you should cover with particular anti-corruption policies. With focused anti-corruption policies, you should try to establish where exactly the corruption risks are, what are the possible mechanisms, and you should try to address this with particular policies. And if they want to initiate a discussion about this, we discuss it. As for the analytical report, we just try to, I didn't focus much on this because I don't know if there are analytical reports envisaged for this project. But the analytical report, basically, this is an example of one for 9 public organizations. You can download it and read it from CSD webpage. And it is also linked in the presentation. So this basically tries to establish what types of policies work in which situations, and why, and what types of activities are more prone to risk. When are there gaps or discrepancies in the assessments? So by analytical report, we really mean something more not so maybe practical and to the point, but finding some general trends and conclusions regarding anti-corruption policies. For example, one general conclusion we found is that general policies which apply to all activities are not as effective as policies applying to particular activities which focus on a particular scenario, like, for example, rotation. So the rotation in a particular activity, it focuses on the particular scenario that official A is all the time in contact with particular people, and he might become compromised. He might become corrupted long term, let's say. So they do rotation in order to introduce another public official because it is difficult to bribe everyone. However, when this is not done correctly, for example, you rotate only 3 people who are always in contact with the same people, let's say, then you can buy all 3 people together. This was the case with the rotation in the border police. So this is less effective. If you want to do rotation really effectively, you should transfer people between different units in the organization and so on, which is not always possible. But still, this is an example of a very, very particular and to the point policy, while more general policies, sometimes they're effective. Like, for example, the whistleblower protection was very effective in one of the organizations. However, in most organizations, it was not that effective because in many cases, this is because it is not implemented correctly. There are violations of this policy, and of course, if it is not enforced enough, then it is useless. So this is the analytical part of the reports. There we try to gather information from other sources as well, like information from experts, information from clients of the organization. Clients are just businesses or citizens who are in contact with the organization. And we ask them if they were offered a bribe, then we just juxtapose their answers with the public officials. And same with the experts, but we treat experts more or less like the officials. The questionnaire is the same. And this is more or less the analytical report. We try to have an objective assessment of an organization and to complement the MACP report with additional information, with desk research, with analysis of procurement for this organization, with additional ad hoc surveys and other sources of information. And we try to find what the truth is regarding this organization. While for the technical report, we just give it to the management and we say, here we find potential problems based on your own answers. So these are the answers you provided them, and we just structured them in this way. And it seems to us that there are vulnerabilities here, here, and here, but the ultimate decision is yours. We are not assessing your organization. We are comparing your organization with itself. So if you want to see a good assessment of your organization, do this in 2 years again, and we'll tell you which what improved and what declined. So this is the difference between the analytical report and the technical report. And I see the question, what about the 2 last steps? So I'm not sure. Do you want to ask this in person? Basically, the 2 last steps, we covered the analysis of the data. Oh, I'm on the wrong presentation. We covered the analysis of the data with the 2 possible reports, and the desk research and publishing analytical report is an optional step, which I just explained what the rationale behind it is. And you can download this publication and see how what such report looks like. This is what it looks like for 9 organizations, and there are some data, more detailed data for them in the appendixes there, so it might be interesting. So are there any further questions? Please feel free to ask anything.
Of what I could see in the report, so the number of respondents were like sometimes half of the staff within one organization. Is that right? You really try to have an average, at least half of staff as a way to represent finally the whole employees, or how many respondents do you have generally per organization in terms of percentage?
Yes, thank you. This is a great question. So indeed, in smaller organizations, we suggest using exhaustive sampling, which means you basically invite everyone in the organization. If there are 50 employees of the organization, you invite all 50 and you invite them multiple times until you reach, let's say, 30 out of the 50 employees. For larger organizations, and by larger we mean more than 1,000 employees, you can do a representative sample, which for a representative sample of 400 employees is enough. But since the sampling process is a bit difficult, so we basically send instructions to the department managers how to randomly select employees. Most organizations, even above 1,000 employees, they prefer to have exhaustive sampling, which means sending the survey to all the employees. So we have some very high numbers for some of the public organizations. For example, I think we had maybe thousands of employees in some of the Italian organizations. Let me just quickly check about Italy, but I think the sample size was very high there, so it's alphabetical. So okay, this is the Emilia-Romagna region. It is in this report I mentioned, and okay, we didn't have 1,000, but we had more than 500. Oh no, yeah, we had more than 1,000 employees. We had 1,100 employees, and half of them were with management functions, half were employees without management functions. So basically, we recommend to simply invite all the employees of the organization to fill in the survey and to continue reminding them and sending reminders and asking them to actually do it until at least 500 or half of them have completed the survey.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Impressive. Yeah.
And for the experts, I should say that it is not possible, unfortunately, to find 1,000 experts. So there we are okay with 20 or 30 experts. The main idea there is to have at least 20 or 30 in order to avoid individual biases, because experts are sometimes biased. They might be let's say they might sympathize to a particular party and to be less critical if this party is in power, or they or on the contrary, they might sympathize to an opposition party and be super critical. So in order to avoid such personal biases among experts, we like to have at least 20 or 30, so that you can see if there is large individual differences between the different experts, and to have more robust assessment scores for the expert survey. So any further questions? I think we are over our our time. There is never enough time for these trainings, because there are many things which come up, but feel free to contact me or Daniel Todor-Galev at any moment if you have any questions, and we'll, as always, try to answer them. And please download these books I mentioned in my presentations, especially the example reports and the toolkit, which is the most important instrument for implementing MACPI at SCAP-TSL. Thank you very much for your patience.
I also like to thank you all, and indeed, as it was suggested, we can create a mailing list or a Slack channel where we can answer questions related to MACPI, because I'm sure when you actually start to implement the survey, more issues will emerge related to how to calculate this indicator or that ranking. So we can at any time provide additional instructions. And also, I would like to ask you to please engage within your staff expert or a colleague who has knowledge in calculating statistical data. This will greatly help us. As you know, in the budget, we have around 3 months per year as a working time for MACPI. So hopefully that will be enough to manage with this activity. But the most difficult and step, as it was mentioned, is to convince a public institution to cooperate with us. And as Alex said, it is crucial when approaching the institution to underline that we want to help them, we don't want to criticize them, and this tool assesses the quality of the anti-corruption policies and the potential corruption risks, not specific cases. We will not name names, we will not criticize or shame anyone. And for that purpose, we'll also provide you some examples of official letters that we have used in the past to approach the institutions, and will help you at each step of the way. And once again, I'd like to ask you to please send me next week the full text of the energy background analysis. And as you know, inside of this analysis, one of the points is dedicated to nominating several of your national institutions that could potentially be assessed through MACPI. So please have in mind these specifics that were presented regarding the size of the organization. And we'll see each other soon. Goodbye.